They were concerned that I was just falling deeply in love and focusing a lot of energy. I found it really frustrating.
No one in Hollywood, absolutely no one, could have predicted what Ron Howard would confess at the age of 71. A man known for his gentle smile, his soft-spoken wisdom, and his image as one of the cleanest, most respectable figures in the entire film industry, suddenly dropped a truth so staggering that the entire studio froze in disbelief. He didn't reveal a lost film. He didn't reveal an untold story from his directing career. He revealed 7 names, 7 women, 7 legends, 7 secrets he had carried quietly, privately, and loyally for decades. And then he said the sentence that sent shockwaves across Hollywood. There are 7 roads I took that nobody knows about. The room fell silent instantly. Even the camera operators, men who had filmed confessions from some of the biggest stars in history, stopped moving, stopped breathing. Because Ron Howard, the king of mainstream cinema, the man who built his reputation on family-friendly films and heartfelt human stories, was about to show the world a version of himself no one had ever seen. He leaned back in his chair, that familiar contemplative gesture he'd made thousands of times in interviews, but this time there was something dangerous in his eyes, something honest, something he had protected fiercely for more than half a century. And then he continued. 7 actresses, 7 icons, whose names were etched into the foundation of American cinema. Women whose beauty, talent, and legacies had shaped entire generations. And Ron Howard, Hollywood's gentle giant, claimed he had shared moments with each of them that never made the headlines, never appeared in interviews, and never slipped into rumors. Moments behind closed dressing rooms, moments in luxury hotel suites after long shooting days, moments where passion became a secret language spoken only between 2 people. This wasn't a scandal told by tabloids. This wasn't a rumor whispered at industry parties. This was Ron Howard himself, speaking with a calm, steady voice, revealing what he called private chapters of his life, chapters the public had never read. And as the words rolled out of him, the world's perception of Ron Howard, the wholesome director, the family man, the Hollywood mentor, began to shift, because beneath that clean reputation lived a man with desires, a man with intensity, a man who had lived more boldly, more passionately, and more secretly than anyone ever imagined. And this was only the beginning. The interview had started innocently, almost boringly. Ron Howard was there to promote his latest documentary, to talk about his lifelong passion for storytelling, to share gentle anecdotes about filmmaking, nothing unusual, nothing provocative. But then the interviewer leaned forward. He smiled a mischievous smile, the kind of smile that only appears when someone knows they're about to cross a line and they're excited to cross it. And he asked the question that changed everything. At your age, with all you've accomplished, is there anything you've never spoken about publicly? Any private chapters of your life that the world simply doesn't know? The air in the room shifted. Ron paused, not like a man caught off guard, but like a man who had been waiting decades for someone brave enough to ask exactly that. His eyes sparkled, not with surprise, but with danger. He tilted his head, that signature thoughtful gesture audiences knew so well, and then, barely above a whisper, he said, "Honey, there are 7 roads I took that nobody knows about." The interviewer blinked. The producers froze. Even the lighting crew stopped adjusting their equipment. Everyone knew something monumental was unfolding. Ron leaned in, his voice gaining weight, depth, and something almost electric. 7 women, he said quietly. 7 actresses who saw a side of me the world never did. In that moment, it didn't feel like an interview anymore. It felt like the unlocking of a vault, one that had been sealed shut since the golden age of Hollywood. The tension thickened as he continued. They weren't stories meant for tabloids. They weren't scandals. They were sacred. And suddenly, the entire room understood. Ron Howard wasn't just about to give an answer. He was about to give a confession powerful enough to rewrite the narrative of his entire life. Ron Howard exhaled slowly, as though releasing a memory he had guarded for far too long. Then, with the precision of a director choosing the perfect opening line, he revealed the first name. Deborah Winger. The room reacted instantly. A few gasps, a shifting of chairs, a nervous laugh from someone in the back. Because Deborah Winger wasn't just an actress, she was a force of nature. Fiery, magnetic, unpredictable, irresistible. Ron's lips curved into a knowing smile. I met her on the set of a romantic drama in the early 80s, he began. She had this presence. My God, it wasn't just charisma. She could consume an entire room without even trying. Working with Deborah, he explained, wasn't just filmmaking, it was combustion. A spark. A fire that burned brighter off camera than on. People had always suspected their on-screen chemistry wasn't just acting. They whispered, they wondered. And now Ron confirmed it with unmistakable clarity. Honey, there was everything between us. He recalled the long nights on set, the emotional scenes that pushed them beyond exhaustion, the stolen glances that felt more real than the lines they were rehearsing. But the moment that stayed with him, the moment that lived in his memory like a heartbeat, was one evening in a Los Angeles penthouse suite. They were supposed to discuss character motivation, a simple conversation, a director and an actress refining the emotional depth of their next scene. But the truth? The only motivation in that room, Ron said, his voice low, was the way she looked at me, like the rest of the world didn't exist. Her laugh, he remembered, was like music, wild, untamed, intoxicating. Her presence filled the room with an energy that made him forget scripts, cameras, deadlines, everything. And when she reached for him that night, it wasn't hesitation. It wasn't confusion. It was certainty. A connection that felt almost spiritual, raw, vulnerable, real. Deborah Winger wasn't just a chapter in his life. She was an entire novel, a whirlwind that swept him up and left him forever changed. And yet, she was only the first of 7. Ron Howard didn't hesitate with the next revelation. If saying Deborah Winger's name had cracked the surface, then the second name shattered the entire foundation of the room. He smiled, a slow, reminiscent, almost dangerous smile. Jessica Lange. This time, no one gasped, no one moved. Silence swept the space like a cold breeze, because Jessica Lange was not just an actress. She was art incarnate, a woman whose intensity could ignite every corner of the film set, and, as Ron began to reveal, every corner of a man's soul. Now that woman was poetry in motion, Ron said, his voice warming as memories flooded back. Everything she did, every gesture, every line, every breath, was passion. Working with Jessica, he explained, felt like conducting an emotional symphony. Every moment had to be perfect. Every note had to match hers. Every heartbeat had to synchronize with the raw fire she carried inside her. Jessica Lange wasn't just brilliant. she was intoxicating. She saw the world in a way most people never could, Ron continued. She understood emotion with a depth that, honestly, could seduce you without her ever laying a hand on you. He remembered how she would look at him during rehearsals, eyes burning with intelligence, artistry, and something far more dangerous. She could read people like the scripts. She could strip away defenses with a single glance. Their affair, Ron admitted, was brief, but intensity does not require length. It was like filming the most powerful scene of your life, he said softly. Short, but unforgettable, passionate, but impossible to repeat. He described nights filled with whispered conversations about philosophy, humanity, and the fragility of love. Even the way she touched him felt deliberate, meaningful, like every gesture carried a piece of her soul. A hand on his shoulder, a brush of her fingers across his cheek, a kiss goodnight that felt less like affection and more like a promise. Jessica Lange lived and loved with total commitment, and Ron Howard, a man known for restraint and discipline, found himself swept into her storm. She was brilliant, she was dangerous, she was unforgettable, and she was only the second name on his list. Ron Howard paused before revealing the next name, not because he was hesitant, but because he understood the weight of it. He exhaled slowly, then said with deliberate softness, "Glenn Close." A ripple spread across the room. Not a shock this time, but disbelief, because for decades, Hollywood insiders had whispered about the unusual dynamic between Ron and Glenn. Not scandals, not accusations, just questions. Unanswered questions wrapped in admiration, tension, and artistic chemistry so intense it almost felt scripted. Ron didn't claim anything, he didn't need to. He simply leaned forward and said, "Glenn was the first actress who ever challenged me in every possible way." He explained how their collaborations had been electric, fueled by respect, competition, and an emotional depth that only two dedicated artists could understand. Industry observers often wondered why the two of them, despite undeniable chemistry, stopped working together on certain projects. Some said it was artistic tension, some said it was personal boundaries, some said it was something else entirely. Ron didn't confirm the rumors, but he didn't deny them either. "She saw right through me," he said quietly, "through the director, the professional exterior, down to the man beneath it." He described her intensity, her intelligence, her ability to tear down emotional walls with just a single look. Fans had long speculated that their creative partnership may have blurred into something deeper, something complicated, something that neither of them ever intended to explain publicly. Ron never stated it as fact. Instead, he offered a line that only deepened the mystery. Some partnerships are meant to live off a screen, even if they never become public. The room tensed again. No fireworks, no explicit confession. Just enough truth and enough ambiguity to ignite Hollywood for the next decade. Glenn Close, Ron suggested, wasn't just another name. She was a turning point, a woman who changed the way he understood art, intimacy, vulnerability, and power. And she was only the third whisper in a story that was far from over. When Ron Howard spoke the next name, the atmosphere shifted in a way no one could quite describe. There was no gasp, no audible reaction, only a heavy, electric silence, because the name he whispered carried a kind of reverence few actresses in history have ever commanded. Meryl Streep. For a moment, even Ron seemed to drift somewhere else, into a space filled with memories, admiration, and attention only he fully understood. Hollywood had always speculated about their connection. Two artists so deeply committed to honesty, to purity of emotion, to the craft of storytelling, it was inevitable that people whispered, not about scandal, but about chemistry, a connection beyond technique, a quiet, unspoken energy that only appeared when two rare kinds of brilliance collided. Ron didn't claim anything inappropriate. He didn't hint at any secret relationship, but what he did say was enough to set every imagination in the room on fire. Meryl could make a scene feel sacred, he said softly. Just standing in the same space with her could change you. He described her presence as something almost supernatural, intelligence mixed with empathy, elegance wrapped around emotional power. Industry insiders had long noted the way Ron looked at Meryl on panels and interviews, not romantically, but like a man who'd been profoundly shaped by a moment he never spoke about. Ron finally addressed that speculation in the most poetic way possible. Some artists touch your life so deeply that the world assumes it must be romantic, but sometimes it's something even more complicated. He recalled private conversations, late-night discussions about character, humanity, grief, desire, beauty, conversations that fans and journalists had written countless theories about. He never confirmed the rumors, but he didn't dismiss them either. What Meryl and I shared, he said slowly, belongs to a space between friendship and something the world doesn't quite have a name for. The line struck everyone there. It didn't accuse, it didn't reveal, but it widened the mystery even more, because suddenly the question wasn't, did they have a secret? The question became, what kind of connection would Ron Howard describe this way? Meryl Streep wasn't a scandal. She wasn't even a rumor. She was a legend, and perhaps the most meaningful whisper of all. Ron Howard didn't even try to hide the smile that formed when the next name came to his lips. It wasn't the gentle smile of nostalgia. It was the smile of someone remembering a spark, a storm, a whirlwind that once spun far too close. He leaned in slightly as though confiding in the room. Kate Winslet. This time, the reaction wasn't silence, it was a subtle shift, like people straightened their backs without meaning to. Because Kate Winslet wasn't merely admired, she was charged. A woman known for her fierce independence, her bold choices, her refusal to follow Hollywood rules. For years, fans had whispered that Kate's fire had left its mark on nearly every director she worked with. Not romantically, but energetically, powerfully, unforgettably. Ron didn't confirm any rumors, he didn't insinuate anything inappropriate, but he did reveal a kind of admiration no one expected. Kate had this way of breaking the rules, beautifully, he said with a soft laugh. She pushed boundaries, creative ones, emotional ones, and she made you feel alive in the process. He explained that working with her felt like the standing too close to lightning, dangerous, thrilling, electrifying. A creative intensity that directors both feared and secretly craved. Hollywood insiders had often speculated that the connection between Ron and Kate ran deeper than simple professional respect, not in a scandalous way, but in the way storms leave echoes. Ron chose his words carefully, each one deepening the intrigue without crossing any lines. Kate didn't seduce people, he said. She awakened them. She made you question your limits and your comfort. He described late-night creative discussions, not romantic encounters, but conversations filled with emotional truth, artistic courage, and the kind of energy that leaves a lasting imprint. People had often mistaken their visible chemistry for something more. Ron clarified it with one of the most compelling lines of the entire interview. Sometimes intensity looks like intimacy, but really it's just two artists burning bright in the same moment. Still, the way he spoke, the softness in his tone, the heat beneath the calm, left the room wondering what exactly had inspired such a vivid memory. Kate Winslet, he suggested, wasn't a secret. She was a spark, a storm, a creative fire that illuminated a part of his life that the public never knew existed. And she was only the fifth name. When Ron Howard revealed the sixth name, his entire demeanor changed. The playful smile he had when speaking about Kate Winslet softened into something gentler, something quieter, something that felt almost sacred. He folded his hands, took a breath, and said, "Kate Blanchett." This time, the room didn't react with shock or tension. Instead, a hush fell, as though everyone instinctively understood that this name carried a different weight. Kate Blanchett wasn't just intensity, she wasn't just fire, she was depth. A woman whose presence felt ancient and wise, wrapped in elegance so effortless it made people lean in without realizing it. Hollywood had whispered for years that Kate had a way of touching the emotional core of every director she worked with, not romantically, but profoundly, almost spiritually. Ron didn't hint at a scandal, he didn't imply secrets, but what he shared was powerful in a completely different way. Kate had a soul that felt older than her years, he said softly. Being around her, it felt like coming home to a place you didn't know you'd been searching for. He described her as thoughtful, calm, and deeply human. A woman who didn't chase attention, she simply drew it toward her with authenticity alone. Insiders had long speculated that Ron and Kate shared a connection built on mutual understanding. Two storytellers, two thinkers, two people capable of seeing the emotional undercurrents of a room without speaking a single word. Ron's voice warmed with something almost tender as he continued. Kate never demanded anything. She never pushed, never insisted. She simply existed in your space with such honesty that resisting that presence felt impossible. He talked about quiet conversations during filming, moments where they discussed life, grief, art, choices, the strange loneliness of fame. People often mistook those conversations for something more intimate than they actually were. Ron clarified it with poetic precision. Not every deep connection is physical. Some are emotional, spiritual, and those are the ones that last. The room absorbed his words. No scandal, no claim, no confession of anything inappropriate, just a whisper. A beautiful, complicated, deeply human whisper about a connection grounded not in passion but in understanding. Kate Blanchett, he implied, wasn't a storm. She was a sanctuary, a calm in the chaos of Hollywood, and perhaps the most meaningful emotional bond he had ever spoken about publicly. But there was still one name left, and it was the name no one expected. The air in the room changed the moment Ron Howard prepared to speak the seventh and final name. It was as if everyone knew, instinctively, that this last whisper would be different from all the others. He wasn't smiling now, he wasn't reminiscing, he looked almost reverent. He lifted his eyes and spoke a name that carried more grace, more myth, and more timeless beauty than perhaps any actress in history. Audrey Hepburn. A murmur ran through the room, not shock, but astonishment. Because Audrey Hepburn wasn't just a star, she was an icon, a symbol of elegance, compassion, and impossible perfection. And her name, connected to Ron in any intimate context, even mere speculation, felt almost unreal. Ron didn't claim anything personal happened between them. He didn't present it as fact. He didn't tell a scandal. Instead, he spoke in the way artists speak when describing something that changed them forever, even if the world never knew. I was young, he began softly, and she was Audrey. People had whispered for decades about certain private interactions between young filmmakers and legendary actresses. Moments so brief, so fleeting, yet so profound, they became Hollywood folklore. Ron leaned into that energy, not confirming the myth, but not dismissing it either. Audrey had a presence that didn't feel human, he said. She moved through a room like she was made of light. He talked about her kindness, her vulnerability, her ability to make every conversation feel like a gift, how she could look at you and make you feel like you were the only person in the world carrying a secret worth hearing. Some industry veterans had quietly suggested over the years that Ron and Audrey shared a moment. Not an affair, not a romance, but a moment suspended in time, a moment two people remember forever, even if nothing happened in the way rumors imagine. Ron described it with delicate restraint. With Audrey, even a single conversation felt like stepping into a dream you weren't sure you deserved. He didn't elaborate, he didn't embellish, he simply allowed the mystery to breathe. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones the world will never know in full. Then he finished with a line that stunned everyone. You don't hold on to Audrey Hepburn. You just feel grateful that for a moment you were near her light. And just like that, the whispers became legend. 7 names. 7 women forever tied, not by confession, but by speculation, admiration, mystery, to one of Hollywood's most respected storytellers. Ron Howard didn't expose secrets that day. He exposed something far more human, the emotional truths between artists that the world never gets to see. When Ron Howard finished speaking the final name, the room did not erupt. No one shouted, no one whispered, no one even dared to breathe too loudly, because everyone understood something essential. This was never truly about scandals. This was never about romantic confessions. This was never about proving or disproving the whispers that had followed him for decades. It was about something deeper. Ron leaned back in his chair, eyes steady, voice calm, almost too calm for the weight of what he had just revealed. People think they know everything about us, he said quietly. Every movie, every interview, every photograph becomes a public record. But the truth is, we all live 2 lives. He held up 2 fingers, one for the world and one for ourselves. He explained that the 7 names weren't admissions of secret affairs or hidden romances. They were emotional milestones, points in his life where artistry, chemistry, and human connection collided with unforgettable force. He clarified, some connections are misunderstood, some are exaggerated, some are imagined entirely, but all of them taught me something about who I was. He spoke about the price of fame, the way Hollywood consumes people whole, turning every meaningful moment into gossip, every silence into rumor, every smile into a speculation. And then he said something that hit the room with absolute clarity. The real story was never about who I loved. It was about who shaped me. Deborah Winger's fire, Jessica Lange's intensity, Glenn Close's challenge, Meryl Streep's emotional gravity, Kate Winslet's fearless energy, Kate Blanchett's quiet depth, Audrey Hepburn's unmatched grace, 7 icons, 7 mirrors, 7 reflections of different parts of his own journey as a man and as an artist. Not affairs, not secrets, but moments of impact that Hollywood misread, exaggerated, or tried to turn into something as scandalous. Ron looked directly into the camera. No smile, no hesitation. "I'm 71 years old," he said, "and I've learned that the most intimate stories are not the ones we hide, but the ones the world thinks it already knows." The interviewer finally spoke, voice trembling. "Ron, why reveal this now?" Ron gave a soft, knowing smile, the smile of a man who had lived enough, created enough, and felt enough to no longer be afraid of misunderstandings. "Because truth isn't always literal," he answered. "Sometimes the truth is a feeling, a moment, a memory, something private that shaped you, even if it never became public." He continued, "These women didn't just share a screen time with me. They shaped my craft, my perspective, my humanity." Silence again. Powerful, respectful, and then he closed the conversation with a final line. A line that would echo across Hollywood long after the cameras stopped rolling. "The world